On biotechnology. The Woodrow Wilson Science and Technology Innovation Program does these surveys to find out how many people know what synthetic biology is and to find out what people think about it. And in their January survey, they found out that 3/4 of the people contacted knew little or nothing about synthetic biology. And we can speculate as to why that is the case, given the fact that synthetic biology is well underway, is financed with public monies, heavily financed by public monies, and that the promoters say that what they can do is program life. So these are things that you would think folks would want to know about, and yet 3/4 of those polls know nothing about it. So we can speculate as to why that is the case, given the fact that the public should know about it and doesn't. Well, in many of the public presentations that the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab put on last year and the year before, in their pitches to try and find a site for their second campus, the outreach that they did to the East Bay cities, they never talked about synthetic biology, even though the second campus is going to be the largest synthetic biology lab compound in the world. Now, the Synthetic Biology Engineering Research Center, also known as SynBurk, which is dedicated to making biology easier to engineer, is holding an event next week, but this event is by invitation only. Science entrepreneurs who stand to profit lavishly from the new biotechnological order that they seek to create will be making presentations, just not to the general public. And so we're left to sort of speculate who's invited and why are they invited. Well, East Bay Conversations is free and it's open to the public. And the aim is to take controversial technologies, pull them out from behind the closed doors of labs and corporate boardrooms, and bring them into the town square for you to consider. And we have some volunteers that are going to be passing out questions. Sorry, they're not going to pass out the questions. They're going to pass out the envelopes for you to write down your questions if you have them, because we want you to participate. It's also being live streamed on KPFA and Synbiowatch.org. Down the road, hopefully, Synbiowatch.org will have live chat rooms and things like this so that we can get the town square to continue to be interested in this. We also have, the volunteers are going to pass out little programs that will tell you about the next 3 conversations, and we hope to see you back here for some of those as well. And we'd also like to be able to bring you a 2014 series of East Bay Conversations. And in order to do that, we're going to ask for your donations. So the volunteers are also going to be passing around envelopes. No amount is too small. It's all tax deductible. So keep that in mind as well. Thank you very much in advance for that help. And thank you also to the CS Fund for its general support of a number of the groups associated with Synbiowatch. If you're not prepared to donate tonight, you can also donate online. There's the table outside where you can donate right here tonight with your credit card. You can also pick up some posters and pass them along to people that you know. Now, tonight's conversation, When Green Tech Isn't Clean Tech, is hosted by Gopal Dayaneni of Movement Generation, Justice and Ecology Project, which is also a member of Synbiowatch. Gopal has worked for social, economic, and environmental justice through organizing and campaigning, teaching, and writing since the late 1980s. He's campaigned on human rights and environmental justice, and he provides progressive organizations with support in communications and campaign planning. We're very happy to have Gopal here with us tonight, and we're looking forward to his return as host further on down the road.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and I know some people will probably straggle in and stuff, but we really appreciate you taking the time out to come today. this is the first in a series of conversations. So we wanted to start by setting out some framing for the moment that we're in, the time that we are in right now. And as we all know, we face an enormous number of social and ecological challenges. And we are at a crossroads as we undermine the primary means of production on this planet, which is the biological and cultural diversity on this planet. The economy starts to crack, starts to feel the crumble. And we are now at a crossroads in the economy. We are at a moment where we can look from where we stand and look down two different paths. And one path is the path of a new industrial revolution, one that promises to provide us everything that, and even more than the last industrial revolution has provided us, except there won't be any of the ugly smog or the unsightly poverty or the atmospheric disruption or the polluted oceans. All that stuff gets to go away, but we get to keep everything else. It sounds really great. And this new industrial revolution that they're promising us is this one path that we're squinting down. And Jim Thomas from the Etc. Group has spent a lot of time looking down that road and seeing what lies ahead. But we're actually at that crossroads. There's another road that we can look down, and it's the road of remaking our relationship to place, to each other, to thinking in terms of what is ecologically resilient and socially responsible and socially just. It is an economy based on relocalization and regionalization of our production and our consumption to get into right relationship. And that road is being journeyed by Rebecca Burgess from Fibershed Project, who's looking at how we can think differently about our relationship to our resources and our resource base. And so she's going to talk a little bit about a sheds economy. And it's a very interesting moment because this is a global crossroads in the economy, but we actually happen to stand at a very unique place in the Bay Area, because we are the epicenter or one of the epicenters of both roads. We're at sort of like this very interesting place where we are a hotbed of these industrial corporations and research institutions that are pushing this new fancy, shiny industrial economy. And we are also the hotbed of incredibly robust, diverse, resilient projects around food systems, around fiber and materials, around work and labor and our relationships to each other. So we thought for this first conversation, it would be exciting to bring these two roads, to look down both of these roads together, and to hear both about this. The biotechnology and the bioeconomy and the other aspects of this sort of new industrial economy, but also provide us not just with the gloom and doom, but with the positive vision of what's possible, and to look at that right here from the lens of the Bay Area. So we're going to start with Jim Thomas, who is with the Etc. Group. He lives in Montreal. He's a parent like me, and he's got one of the brains that I covet. Like I always imagine wanting to kind of swap brains with him. It's a bummer for you, but really exciting for me. Jim has been watchdogging technology and corporate maneuvering around technology for a very long time, and is going to give us his insights on that. And then he's going to be followed by Rebecca Burgess, the founder of the Fibershed Project, who started with a sort of humble question: what does it look like for me to think about my wardrobe from the perspective of the place where I live? And that has exploded into a quite innovative project that's looking at the material basis and the fabric of our lives, quite literally. So she's gonna talk a little bit about that, and then we're gonna have a little conversation together, and then open it up for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gopal. It's interesting. I think some people here might have come to an event we did about a year ago, also in the Brower Center. And as I stand here, I remember that, in fact, the last time we had a conversation like this, which was over in the the Shattuck Theatre, and we had a film that was about some of these same issues, and we had a discussion. It was hosted by a woman called Becky Tarbutton, who was a very good friend of mine and a very good friend of some of the people here. And unfortunately, Becky's not with us tonight. And I just wanted to start by acknowledging that missing person in this East Bay conversation, because she's someone who has been a really important, inspiring part of deep thinking conversations. And as we talk about these things, I certainly have Becky in my mind. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And for those of you who knew her as well, she was very much there. Tina, at the beginning of this conversation, said we're going to be talking about something called synthetic biology. And I have to say I spent probably about half of my waking life for the last 6 or 7 years trying to grapple with this thing, synthetic biology, and what it is and what it means. So I feel that I'm sort of duty-bound at the beginning of this conversation to lay out for those, to bring us all to sort of a similar understanding of what this object is, synthetic biology, that we're going to talk about. But I don't want to start there, so I'm going to get to that. But so I would like to start actually by stepping back a little bit. And I hope you'll excuse me if I don't start with the trees, but I start with the forest, and then we'll go and we'll describe the trees. Because as Gopal said, and I think he's exactly right, I think the departure point for this discussion that we're going to have tonight is really about industrial production. And in fact, it's the industrial production of stuff, how we as a society make the things we surround ourselves with, whether that's food or fiber or other materials. And what's going on in that economy that produces that $130 trillion economy, the real economy that manufactures stuff that we interact with and depend upon all the time. And I think we are very much going to be talking tonight about a revolution in that economy, an industrial revolution, or maybe several different industrial revolutions that are sort of happening at the same time and are kind of one and the same. Because I think the way in which, just as Gopal said, our economy is at a crisis point because of the limits that it's butting up against, the ecological limits, the social limits, the financial limits. At the same time, it's undergoing a massive transformation that I think isn't necessarily visible broadly, but is very much happening. And while it's undergoing transformation, while the way in which we produce things is changing very, very fast, it's a moment in history when we can reassess and say, is this the way we want it to change? And that's where I think a conversation with Rebecca is extremely useful. The sort of production economy that synthetic biologists imagine, or those who are paying synthetic biologists to develop certain technologies, is, I think, a very different vision from the sort of economy that Fibershed is developing. So I think that's the conversation we're going to have. And I think starting with textiles is a tremendously good place to start, if only because the last major industrial revolution in production, the industrial revolution of the 18th, and 19th centuries, started with textiles. You know, that it was the changes in how we process cotton and wool, and how we process and weave textiles that were represented by the introduction of the spinning jenny, or the cotton gin, or the power loom in the 18th century, that gave us the new industrial production system, the factory system, and everything that came from it. The textiles was really the spark that changed all of our production systems 200 years ago, or 250 years ago. And that with that change in the production of textiles and the rise of the factory system, and particularly the need for something to run the machines, and so we began to move to coal and into fossil fuels, and then what were we going to do with all this leftover stuff from the coal, the coal tar? And so we developed synthetic chemistry to use the coal tar to make dye so that we could dye the textile. And so we have a new industry, the synthetic chemistry industry, built on the back of the textile industry, which in turn, as coal gave way to petrochemistry, this marvelous, magical technology of turning petroleum into every sort of thing, whether it's fertilizers or pesticides or plastics, the better living through chemistry. That we then saw this unfolding of production as we've never seen before. And And yet at the same time, the changes that were brought about geopolitically, the rise of the cotton plantations in the New World and the requirement for labor, so the bringing of slaves from Africa and everything that followed from that. We can look back 200 years later, and we could trace a story directly from the introduction of the cotton gin, the introduction of the spinning jenny, all the way through to the sort of the systemic racism here in America, all the way through to the hole in the ozone layer, all the way through to the refinery in Richmond, all the way through to the chemicals in my wife's breast milk. All of that we can follow through from the introduction of new production in textiles, and so changing production methods and an industrial revolution can mean a hell of a lot way down the line. And if we're to listen to the economic planners now, we're in that moment again. What we're hearing from various different quarters is that we're in the foothills, or even beyond that now, of an industrial revolution as big, maybe even bigger than that occurred at the end of the 18th century. And as I listen to this, I hear that all the explanations of this new industrial revolution seem to involve this object, synthetic biology, that we're going to talk about tonight. And I hear three different versions of the industrial revolution that we're in. So I want to just go through those, and then we'll go to synthetic biology. So I'm not doing PowerPoint here, but if I was, I would show you a picture of The Economist's front cover from, I think, about April last year, which had the words, "The New Industrial Revolution." And it basically The Economist pronounced that we are now into the new industrial revolution. The new industrial revolution that The Economist believes we are into was the digital production of stuff. The iconic image of the new industrial revolution, according to The Economist, and in that front cover, which I can't show you, is the 3D printer. So for those who don't know what a 3D printer is, it's about the size of a coffee making machine, and just like an inkjet printer prints out things in 2D, it prints out photographs and documents. So a 3D printer, as it suggests, prints out 3D objects. And then increasingly, we have a digital world of 3D objects. You can go to websites such as Thingiverse, and you can download the file for a 3D object. It could be for a spoon, or for a piece of clothing, or like a shoe or something. And then you can print it out as a 3D thing. And that what this means is that production is no longer done in a factory in China. It's done in your desktop. The language is, this is China on your desktop. But it's not just, it's not, and in fact, if you want to read about this, here's a book by Chris Anderson, who lives here in Berkeley. He was previously the editor of Wired. He writes about this breathlessly, this new digital making of stuff and sharing of stuff. He makes drones digitally. And it's not, but it's broader than just this printing out of matter in a 3D printer. That in effect, the ability to share stuff digitally and then print it somewhere else, whether it's printed on a 3D printer, or it's printed in a factory in China according to your specifications, or it's produced according to your specifications by a sort of new pick-and-place robots that are increasingly becoming an important part of the workplace, that you have a new form of production here. And part of that includes biological production. That as well as programming robots and programming 3D printers, we're going to program biology to produce a number of different things. We're going to program biology to spit out fuels, or to spit out plastics, or to spit out vanilla. And that's synthetic biology. So that's one vision of this new industrial revolution. A second is what gets called convergence. That we're seeing a number of very powerful technologies, nanotechnology, information technology, neurotechnologies, and biotechnologies coming together in new ways. And synthetic biology is very much at the nexus of all these. That we can now, at the nanoscale, at the very smallest atomic scale, we can build life as if it was information. And so that's the sort of second vision of this industrial revolution. And the third vision of this industrial revolution usually gets described with the color green attached to it. That it's the green economy. It's the idea that our new economy is going to be one that's more efficient for the environment, cleaner for the environment. It's going to be about replacing petroleum, getting past the fossil fuel world, and in particular the idea that we're going to move away from fossil fuels and replace oil and coal and gas with sugars. Biofuels are kind of the iconic part of this economy, and it often gets called the bioeconomy. And again, synthetic biology is absolutely key to that, because it imagines that you could take a biological organism that you've programmed to turn sugars into plastics, or to turn sugars into fuels, and so on. So however you cut it, this idea that there is a major industrial revolution coming up, which is being discussed in many spaces, seems to involve synthetic biology. And if we believe that industrial revolutions have long-reaching effects, which they do, then it's worth paying attention to this sort of central technology of all three of these. So what is synthetic biology? It's genetic engineering. It's a kind of souped-up genetic engineering. We sometimes refer to as extreme genetic engineering. And some people will be familiar with what genetic engineering means, that effectively with the sort of genetic engineering that we've had for the last almost 40 years, it's been about taking the DNA that's in living things, the so-called code of life, and taking parts of that code that you find in the cells of every living thing, and identifying a part that will, say, make an organism turn red, or make an organism growing a particular way, cutting it out and pasting it somewhere else. It's a sort of cut and paste approach to changing organisms. Synthetic biology moves away from that, because you no longer have to find an organism, cut something out and move it. You can just build the DNA, that supposed code that is supposedly the instructions for life. The way you do this is you have a machine called a DNA synthesizer. It's about this big. It has 4 bottles. Those 4 bottles have the 4 chemicals that make DNA. Letters G, T, C, and A. And you can decide that you want a piece of DNA in which the code goes G, T, T, C, C, A, T, C, C, G, 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 or whatever you specify. And it will print that out the way that an inkjet printer would print out something, or a 3D printer would print out something. You can print out DNA. This means that you're no longer dependent upon the codes that nature gives you. You can begin to create new sets of codes, and you could imagine those as new instructions for living organisms. That you could take something like a yeast, or an E. coli, or an algae, or some other microbe, and by putting in these new GTTCCA codes that you've just printed out, those theoretically are new instructions that might hijack the cell to do something new. And so you're programming a living organism in the way that you supposedly might program a computer or program a machine. And that's effectively the basis of synthetic biology. It's this idea that on the one hand, you're synthesizing life, you're making it out of chemicals, and secondly, you're treating it as a programmable engineering problem. And what does that mean you can do practically? Once you can do that, once you can program an organism. Well, so here's the leading examples of synthetic biology right now. And there are probably about 50 to 100 synthetic biology companies, many of them right here in the Bay Area, almost all of them backed by quite large companies in the chemical, energy, and agrochemicals sector, for example. Yeast are mostly what they're working with. Yeast, that wonderful little microbe that makes beer. And when we make beer, what you do is you put a yeast in with sugar, and it ferments it, and it turns the sugar into beer, which is a great thing. Now, if you could engineer that yeast and program it so that it doesn't make beer, so that it makes something else, like plastic, or it makes vanilla, or it makes jet fuel, then you've got a different means of production. And that's what the synthetic biologists are doing. So there's a Palo Alto firm called Geoengineering, who are now owned by DuPont. And what Geoengineering did was they took yeast, they took strands of synthetic DNA, and they used it to reprogram that yeast. I'm using these metaphors rather loosely, and that's how the industry uses them. There are problems with these metaphors of programming, but I'm using their metaphors. They reprogrammed the yeast so that it would take sugar, corn sugar, and it would spit out what was basically the precursor for a plastic called propylene. We now have, DuPont has a large facility in Tennessee. It produces 140,000 pounds. Is it 140,000? 140.
45,000 tons.
145,000 tons.
45,000
tons. We're going to hear more about this from Rebecca. Of propanediol, which is then used for carpets, for sports bras, for a whole range of different things. And what it brings in is sugar, corn sugar. So here you have this new production system. Rather than using petroleum to make plastics, we're using corn to make plastics. And it's synthetic microbes programmed using synthetic DNA that are the conversion. Take another company. In South San Francisco, there's a company called Solazyme. And what Solazyme do is they re-engineer algae. They work very closely with Dow and Chevron. And they re-engineer algae so that the algae also eats sugar, which algae doesn't usually do. And it spits out either fuel. They gave a large amount of fuel at a very high cost to the US Navy, or electrical fluids that they sold to Dow, or cocoa butter, or some of the key oils that you get in coconut oil, like lauric acid and myristic acid. So that's what they're doing. They're working at producing coconut oils, coconut-based, well, previously coconut-based oils in algae, and working with companies like Unilever. If you go across the bridge past Richmond and you go out to sort of San Rafael, and over there's a company called Evolva. So Evolva have also been working with yeast. They've re-engineered the yeast with synthetic microbes so that it takes sugar and it spits out vanilla, natural vanilla, they say. They're going to sell it as natural. They're working with International Flavors and Fragrances, which is the second largest fragrance and flavor company in the world. And they intend to start selling their vanilla, their natural vanilla, at the beginning of 2014. And that has very significant implications for the 200,000 vanilla workers in Madagascar, Reunion, Comoros, plus the others in places like Indonesia, Uganda, and Mexico. Or maybe another example would be a Lilix, another synthetic biology company who already sell a compound called Valencine. It's orange oil. And again, produced from a yeast. And it's the equivalent of what you would get by crushing oranges. And so on. So in each case, the yeast, reprogrammed just slightly differently, produces a very different thing, whether it's fuel or orange oil, or here we have Amyris, who produce patchouli, or rubber, or any number of other different things. And that's the basis of this new industrial production system. And it means two things. Firstly, it means that you're producing more and more of the stuff that the economy requires, not from petroleum, not from gas, although they're also looking at that, but from sugar. And so that requires vast quantities of sugar. That actually a lot of these companies, although they're based here in the Bay Area, are setting up their production facilities in Brazil, because that's where the sugar is. And sugar production in Brazil is booming. It's booming partly because of biofuels, but increasingly because of these new kinds of production methods. And sugar production is not a very pleasant thing. Sugar production, quite aside from the environmental impacts, because it takes a lot of water and it pushes into the Amazon, also socially is very damaging. You have a large amount of basically slave labor in sugar production. Those who work in sugar production works very hard, are exposed to a lot of agrochemicals. You burn the sugar, so you get a lot of release of carbon dioxide. It's a pretty nasty process. And what we're seeing at the moment is we're in the midst of what's probably the largest land grab for about 300 years. And that grab of land across the tropical belt, one of the major drivers is sugar production. And these are very much linked. Secondly, it means you're moving the production of materials that previously were stewarded by farmers in the South, in the developing world. Some of the poorest and most vulnerable farmers, you're moving that production into into fermentation vessels that might be here in the Bay Area, or they might be in Eastern Europe, or they might be in Brazil. You're taking production out of the hands of farmers, you're taking it out of the fields, and you're putting it into closed and proprietary fermentation vessels. And that has very significant implications for the livelihoods of some of the poorest people in the world. It also has implications for the biodiversity that they look after. Take something like vanilla. Vanilla production is very hard. It requires a large amount of labor. It also is grown in what are effectively rainforest situations because it requires shade. So it's very close to conservation efforts. If you start to produce vanilla instead of in a rainforest environment with lots of labor, if instead you produce it in a vat here in the Bay Area, then you're going to open up that land in Madagascar, Cormorus Reunion, for being cleared for sugar plantations. The sugar, of course, is going to feed the vats. And so you can begin to see how a very different production economy is coming into place. I think I've talked a lot. I'm going to hand over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Jim. I always learn a lot listening, and I'm so glad to be here this evening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to frame a little bit about the project that I'm working on, which is I'm Rebecca Burgess, and I founded the Fibershed project. And a lot of what my life has been over the last 2 years is a response to the last industrial revolution. And so I wanted to frame a little bit of the impact of what we started 250 years ago, and what the response, the modern kind of locavore response has been to this industrial revolution that has had far-reaching impacts and unintended consequences. So while we're at this crossroad, I think it's really interesting to be very analytical, critical, thoughtful, contemplative, observant, slow it down, reflect. What does this mean when we take sugars and we tell yeasts and algae to do our bidding, to create plastics for the next generation of tchotchkes? I think that we need to think very seriously about what will be the far-reaching impacts of genetically modifying and creating new life forms that are really the foundations of our life. You are more of the bacteria, you are more DNA of bacteria than you are human DNA. You're 98% bacteria DNA, 2% human. So to mess with those foundations could have much deeper and much more personal, far-reaching consequences than the last industrial revolution. And I think it's important to reflect on the last one and its impacts as they stand today. So I am going to give a PowerPoint presentation, so you get some visuals. And this right here is 10 million years of coevolution. This is what planet Earth has provided us as raw material for, if you want to even call it raw material, it's an ecosystem, and its byproducts, an expression of the beauty of the interrelationship between ungulates and rangelands. One expression of that coevolution is fiber. And for 5,000-10,000 years, human beings have been interrelating depending on the breed of ungulate we're talking about. They have been using these fibers that have come from Mulan, the initial pre-sheep creature. And this fiber has been, animal protein fiber was the foundation for people staying warm, especially these particular sheep have a genetic stock from Spain that came to the United States in the 1700s. This is the churro. And this is the churro represent a way of life right now for the Diné and the Navajo people. And they've been a way of life since the early 1700s. And before, the Navajo were wearing mud and sticky bark on their bodies. And so when the sheep came and they were able to spin the fiber and keep warm with wool and eat the meat from the young lambs that they would harvest from the flock, this became an integral facet of subsistence economy in the Southwest. So this genetic stock is precious. And we are doing very little with the byproduct of this beautiful expression. And I'll get into where wool is today in a moment. The other amazing fiber that's been a part of our lives for thousands of years is cotton. And I bring up these two fibers, wool and cotton, because they really are the California fibers. It doesn't mean we can't grow nettles and hemp and flax, but these are the fibers that are really endemic, I would say, to the agricultural production of California now. And this is a biodynamic organic cotton plant in its second season at Sally Fox's farm in the Capay Valley, 90 miles from here. And I'm wearing jeans made from Sally Fox's cotton, and I wear a lot of clothes made from Sally Fox's cotton, and she rotates sheep through her pastures. So to fertilize her soils, she doesn't use any inputs. So she has one fiber animal harvesting the weeds and the grasses, using them as fuel, and then composting them out their rear end and creating basically a living fertilizer that then nutrifies the soils and allows for the cotton to be planted. She is starting the first cool weather cotton breeding program, which is in spite of, and actually in the face of Monsanto's efforts to create a very homogenized cool weather cotton. She's interested in something called participatory breeding. Participatory breeding is where a community starts to own their own genetic stock. And a community begins to work on creating place-based, very, very relational genetic stocks, so that her cotton, for instance, will grow very well and be very endemic to the Cape Hay Valley and the greater Bay Area. It'll be a cool weather cotton. So if we were really wearing place-based clothes, eventually we'll be wearing cotton. This is my vision. If we are to take a different we were to go at the crossroads and take the Fibershed vision, we would be able to wear this biodynamic color-grown cotton, which requires no dyes. If you don't want to dye it, you don't have to. It grows in brown, rose, can be white, and green. And so this is a project that I was involved in, and this is indigo. So I'm wearing Sally Fox's cotton, but I dyed it in my own indigo, and I'm surrounded by 4,000 indigo plants at a certified organic, very diverse farm up in Lagunitas in West Marin. And so what Fibershed has been about for me has been about trying to localize my wardrobe. So for 1 year, I even wore clothes whose labor, dye, and fiber all came within from 150 miles of my front door. And so the process of clothing myself was an exercise. It was a question. Can I do this? And, when I had people from NPR come and interview me, I was just amazed to see their response, which was like, oh, there's not enough fiber for everyone in the Bay Area to wear these clothes. How silly. And, I thought that myself. I thought, well, this is just about my response to the industry. I'm a textile artist. How am I going to respond to climate change? How am I going to respond to the fossil fuel use that's destroying the planet? It was a personal mission. I didn't realize that I would get into this experience where there was more fiber being grown than I could have ever imagined. There were more farmers under the poverty line just 40 miles from here. There are more people growing the raw materials to clothe us than we are even capable of processing that material. It's amazing the abundance that's in the 20 counties surrounding where we are sitting right now. And so realizing the abundance and that it's so underutilized, I thought when I heard about DuPont's mission to, create Sorona, which is the fiber that's made from the yeast that eat the corn sugar, I thought, that's ridiculous. We don't need it. We actually don't need these materials. We have enough where we're sitting. We're just not using them. We're not utilizing the resources in front of us. And so World War II is where this kind of started. Again, I was going to trace back to the original synthetic fibers. Some of this started to come out. Nylon and polyester were introduced, and around 90% of the sheep farms in the United States went out of business. And they're still struggling to survive. And nylon and polyester were seen as these, panacea, wonderful thing that, it stretched and it dried easily. All of the things that wool actually also does. And then, as Jim put it so interestingly, the petrochemical, the chemistry of our lives started to really come to fruit. So nylon and polyester, fossil fuel-based, and then the synthetic dyes came around in 1856, and William Perkins discovered them, and it was 400 pounds of coal tar for 4 ounces of dye. So coal tar became easier than working with farmers. Synthetic dyes replaced plant-based pigments. So here we have the synthetic fiber revolution after World War II, putting farmers out of business. We have the synthetic dye revolution, putting farmers out of business. So today, these are some of the unintended consequences related to the synthetic dye revolution. This is where 200 million jeans per year are produced. This is the Guangzhou province in the Pearl River Delta in China. This river, tributary of the Pearl River, is filled with endocrine disrupting agents, carcinogens, and neurotoxins at levels which are extraordinarily harmful to the people who live along its shores. And this This zone is where a lot of the production for Target and Walmart, Gap, Banana Republic, Old Navy, most of the fast fashion is taking place. The production for fast fashion is along these shores. So here's an unintended consequence of the synthetic fibers, that we were so pleased, all these fancy, beautiful 1950s housewives wearing their gorgeous nylons and their beautifully, brightly, synthetically dyed clothes. What an advent of industry, how exciting. Well, I don't know if a lot of people know about this, but because I didn't until about a month ago, every time you wash a synthetic fiber in your washing machine, around 1,900 microfibers are released. They become lint. And this plastic lint is getting out through the municipal water supply. And when this study was done in the UK, they went to 18 beaches around the world to find out where the microfibers were coming from that were basically getting into the food web. And these plastic microfibers, they found were prevalently, majority, 80% of them, were coming from our clothes. So most of the plastic pollution on the beaches is coming from the synthetic lint that's coming off of our clothes from our own wash water. So who would have thought? And this is from the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology. It's a very reputable organization. And I just was like, okay, so we thought plastic pollution was from the bottles and from all sorts of other things, but who would have known it was just the stretch factor in our jeans or our stretchy socks. So the solution that DuPont, who came up with nylon and polyester back in the day, their solution is Sorona. They've won Newsweek, I think, in 2005, gave them the greenest company in the world award, and they've received numerous green chemistry awards for this innovation. They worked on it for 10 years with Tate and Lyle and Gene Corps, and it was a pipeline project that was really about getting DuPont off fossil fuels, and so, or so they say. And what they ended up doing is, after 10 years of R&D, $200 million of R&D, $100 million for the actual plant, so it's like $300 million, they figured out that they could create and engineer, I believe it's a yeast, to eat the corn sugar, and in these big vats they can produce biofilm, and the film is then, extrapolated, and then they create yarns. And they were so sure that they could have a 100% biosphere-based synthetic fiber. So they could completely, in their minds, reduce their carbon footprint altogether. We'll get into some of that LCA, or life cycle analysis, in a moment. But what we realized, or they realized, I should say, is that when they started to use Sorona in garments and swimsuits and women's sports bras and all of this, is that it actually needs to be blended with 60% nylon. So at the end of the day, they've actually not really moved away from their use of fossil fuels. So $300 million later, we're still using a synthetic material that is from fossil fuels with just a smattering of synthetic biology mixed in. So really, I don't see this as a solution to the problem, and this is why. So one Sorona plan, not including the research and design money, just the actual installation in Loudon, Tennessee, which is what Jim mentioned. This is on the right. This is $100 million to install, and so Sorona is also, it's patented technology. So if you want to take Sorona plants and you want to replicate them, like Fibershed's vision for supporting processing of fibers is to replicate mills without a proprietary, I own or patent the technology. I'm sharing this technology openly, and most of the technology for processing fibers is over 200 years old. So there's really nothing to be proprietary about. It's very open sourced already. But in this case, you have one plant, it creates 200 jobs, and if you want to put your own Sorona plant in, you cannot. This is a technology that they own, and it's solely theirs. So again, it's like the technology is one thing, but then who owns it, and all the social impacts of ownership are another thing we need to look at critically at this crossroads moment. And then I think about what that $100 million could have done for California. That we could have had $400,000 is what it takes to install a renewable energy powered mill. So we could have put about 250 mills in California, which is actually, we could use more, but around that, and they could be completely running off wind power or some form of renewable energy, directly empowering farmers to process their own materials, giving small and medium scale farmers direct access to the marketplace because they could farm it, process it, and sell it to the surrounding community. You cannot do that with Sirona. You cannot just process a farmed material. A group of farmers aren't going to get involved and produce their own synthetic biological material and then sell it to the surrounding community. It's not that like that. This is, on the left you see the transnational supply chain while at work with patented technologies and ownership. On the right you're seeing the hand of an 85-year-old woman who runs the Yolo wool mill, who is, basically she has a co-op, a membership co-op. Farmers from all the way from Bakersfield to the Oregon-California border are using this mill. It's the one mill left that can process our material into yarn in California. So the next thing that I found really interesting is for indigo. So here I am, I'm the first commercial indigo farmer this side of the Mississippi. And there is another indigo project starting in the southeast by a young woman as well. There's actually 2 women under the age of 40 who are bringing back plant-based botanic blue. And she's growing Indigofera tinctorium, which is a tropical species, and I'm growing a temperate climate, which is Polygonum tinctorium. And what Jim sent me, which I found very interesting, is that they're also on the move to create a non-coal tar-based dye. So how would you create a non-coal tar-based dye? Well, you can take E. coli, and you can modify it. I think they take the tryptophan, and they do something with the tryptophan, and they make the tryptophan within the E. coli produce blue, a blue pigment. And so that is going to be the solution. And when you read about this crossroads, you read about it within many different scientific journals. They'll say you have people starting to grow the indigo again, and then you have the people who are going to engineer it out of E. coli. And it's posited that way by many different researchers. And it's interesting to see where it will go. But the vision that many of the synthetic biologists have for both the textile industry and food and fuel and all of the material culture that you depend upon is that we'll just create a new branch to life's tree, and it'll be Synthetica. And Synthetica promises control over nature, and synthetic biology aims to reduce the chaos of life components. So from hacked bacteria to synthetic life forms, microbes will compute, produce, and do the housework for you. So you can do whatever you need programmed into the bacteria, you can program it and it'll just do your bidding. That's the vision. So, in contrast, the other side of the crossroads. Fibershed. This is a map of where we're sitting. This is our place. This is where we live. These are the people that have the skills as farmers, as ranchers, as artisans, small manufacturers, to produce the clothes that you wear. And this is the amount of people that I collaborated with. I didn't know any of them beforehand. I knew one. It was my mother. She was a seamstress. None of them knew each other. This was 1 year just putting the call out to let's make clothes locally. And this network of artisans and farmers and ranchers and spinners and dyers all came together, and their collaborations precipitated a wardrobe, and that's what I wore. So really, our work has become, out of this project, we're now a nonprofit organization that really is focused on this community ownership of value-added processing. The next industrial revolution, we believe, should be owned and operated by communities using existing biological material that is unmodified. We do not need to. There's so much available. You do not need to tinker with it, I promise. And I'll get to those numbers in a moment. So Fibershed's mission is to develop, support, and promote local natural fiber systems. And these networks we've been establishing have fruited many new businesses. And we also believe in skills training. We've lost a lot of the skills we need to dress ourselves. So we believe in bringing up engineers from the Carolinas, where the industry still exists, bring them out here and train our young people on how to spin, how to weave, how to knit once again. So, in the 20 counties, that map that you saw was not to scale, but really that was about 20 counties in central Northern California. We are producing 1.5 million pounds of wool annually. In California, we're growing around 4 million pounds of wool. California is a net importer of wool products. but we are growing and producing 4 million pounds annually. So if we were just to drive a couple of hours from where we're sitting now, we could, every year, on an annual basis, this is a renewable resource, we would be able to harvest 1.5 million pounds of raw, unprocessed wool. Currently, in this area of California, just taking beyond the Fibershed, Southern California included, we process less than 0.3% of this material. So my question really to all of us is, why do we need to create something synthetic when we're not even using what we have? So the next project of Fibershed is to map the fiber supply. So the USDA and the Resource Conservation Districts and the UC Extension Services have all been assisting us in this mapping project. Actually, the USDA told us, well, this is the first qualitative and quantitative study that's ever been done of our fiber resources, ever. No one has ever just stood up and said, well, what are we doing? What are we growing? What is here, and what's its quality and what's its quantity? We basically know quantity, but those numbers I gave you, 4 million pounds, severely underestimated numbers. We're not even representing the small producers that have like between 0 and 20 sheep. With land values as pricey as they are in the greater Bay Area, most producers are raising between 0 and 20 sheep. So our numbers are far beyond 1.5 million. Some estimates are just in the 20 counties, we might have double that. We might have 3 million pounds just in the 20 counties, which is a few hours drive from where you're sitting. So all of that to say is we need to map it. And we need to know how much of it there is, where it is, and its quality. So Fibershed's taking 2013, and we're working with sheep shearers. And we're going out on the landscape, and we're taking samples, 2 fingers width of every type of breed that we can find. And we're taking the roughest and the finest, and we're going to give a micron, basically, spectrum for every flock. And with that micron analysis, we will be able to understand what kinds of processing equipment, what types of value-added processing equipment is most useful for our own community. Not Canada, not Mexico, not Nevada. What's good for our sheep and our alpaca and our goats? And so there are engineers who are coming out from the Carolinas who are so excited. They're old men in their 80s. They're coming out and they're saying, oh my gosh, are you serious? You're really going to start doing this again? Every community used to have a wool mill. Every community used to employ, community meaning people who were producing 1 million pounds of wool per year. Every community with 1 million pounds of wool per year would at least have a mill employing 30 people before World War II. Mills dotted the landscape, and they clothed us. We used to wear 95% of our clothes before 1965 were all made in the United States. They were all natural fibers. None of them polluted the oceans. None of the synthetic dyes. Well, synthetic dyes were always polluting our rivers. But if you use the natural fibers of these animals, and I did put on the left here, this sheep that looks like a Dalmatian, this is a Jacob sheep. Ancient genetic stock. You don't need to synthesize anything. You can get black to white and all versions of gray just from this one sheep. If you over-dye it with weeds, you can get an amazing spectrum of greens, just with weeds like dandelion root and dock. And then the alpaca on the right, you don't need a lot of alpaca. If you spin 10% of the alpaca with a very rough wool, like some of our roughest churros, 10% alpaca, 90% churro, you can wear it next to your skin. It's amazing how soft and how pliable the alpaca makes a very rough wool. And then down on the right, we have a little Shetland, which is very normal for this area. They're very small little sheep that can graze under the vineyards. Beautiful and a very, what we call mid-range wool, perfectly suited for the fog belt of the coastal region. So we are breeding. The genetics of our area are so rich. They're so abundant. We have thousands of varieties of sheep. We have hundreds of varieties of alpaca, hundreds of varieties of Angora goats and rabbits and cashmere goats. What we have here is precious, and what we have here is worth mapping, processing, and wearing. So I'm going to leave you with this. It doesn't matter how many resources you have if you don't know how to use them. It'll never be enough. And I think the Fibershed taught me this. I was a student of my own project. So I just leave it with that if you ask a question, just start by, I guess my theme here tonight is slow it down and start asking questions. it's the perfect thing to do when at a crossroads. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca and Jim. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then I'm looking at our group, and we passed out some cards, and so if you have questions come up for you, you can write them down and pass them down, and we're going to collect them, and Tina's going to run through them and pick some out for us. I wanted to ask you both. For us, we at Movement Generation, we spend a lot of time sort of trying to think about the balance between how much do we stop the thing we can't stand, and how much are we trying to fight for the thing that we want, and how those two things come together. And so part of what comes up for us is like, what does the future look like down each of these roads, and how do we navigate that? So I wanted to ask you both to sort of squint into the future and tell us what the world looks like in 20 years in the Bay Area, based on what you both know about where we live. And I know you're not from here, Jim, but you spent a lot of time here, so we're going to let you, and you spent a lot of time studying these guys. In 20 years, if we go down the road of this new industrial revolution, what does the Bay Area look like, and how does it relate to the world? And Rebecca, I'm going to ask you the same question, sort of squinting into the future. And you gave a little bit of that for us today, but what does the economy look like in 20 years in the Bay?
So in some ways, it's quite easy to answer this question in terms of what does synthetic biology and the bioeconomy look in 20 years, because there are bioeconomy blueprints. That's just the way the synthetic biology industry works, by blueprint, by roadmap. There are very definite attempts that the Obama released the U.S. National Bioeconomy Blueprint just the beginning of this year or last year.
End of last year.
And so there are very clear visions of what this new economy should look like. So the vision that gets talked about in terms of synthetic biology and production, interestingly, is a little bit. It's not entirely unlike the mill in every community, except for what it is. It's the biorefinery dotted across the landscape. So a biorefinery, which you actually saw a picture of when we're showing where Sorona is made, a biorefinery is basically a large fermentation facility. It's a brewery, if you like, but a kind of a modern brewery. And into that brewery you put sugar of some kind, and whether that's corn sugar or it's sugar cane, and ultimately it would hopefully, or would maybe be cellulose, the sort of wood sugar, and then that's the hardware. What you then need is kind of the software. And the software are the synthetic microbes. So one day you might put in a synthetic microbe that will turn that sugar into plastics, and the next day it would turn it into fuels, and the next day it would turn it into vanilla, and the next day it would turn it into to indigo or whatever. That's the software, if you like. And so these biorefineries would need to have a biomass shed, a sugar shed, if you like. So you would then have an economy that's a means for those biorefineries to be pulling in as much sugar as they can, as cheaply as possible. What you'd probably end up with is something like a zone of destruction, or kind of very intense monoculture sugar production, whether that's corn or other types of sugars, in a circle around that biorefinery. And that you would have these probably dotted around the landscape in order to supply different parts of the country. That, I think, is the sort of physicality of the production end. Of course, you've then got that's the production, but ultimately this is a digital model. You also have software producers. You'll have companies that are writing the software, and those will be based, I think, here in the Bay Area. They already are. That's what Amyris in Emeryville are doing. That's what Solizyme in South San Francisco are doing. That they're effectively the Googles or the Facebooks, or they're writing the software for the production facilities, and so that's that kind of high-tech gentrification still occurs, and it will occur in places like these, the kind of knowledge centres, and then it will get farmed out for production in the rural areas. That's my imagination.
I'm gonna hand it to you, Rebecca, but I want to add to that just that's actually not 20 years from now, right? Like that's happening right now.